My name is Sorgenfrei. I'm the Director of Campaigns with Anima International. And I'm going to jump straight into this talk because I got a lot to say and I don't have a long time to say it. So let me start by establishing what I mean with this metaphor of hill climbing. So what does it mean to be climbing the wrong hill? So in computer sciences, you have this concept of hill climbing. And the idea is that if you imagine yourself being dropped into terrain and it's so foggy, then you can't see more than a hand in front of you. Now the task is that you have to develop an algorithm that as fast as possible will bring you to the top of this hill. And so in the situation with this very simple terrain where there's just one hill, you can have a simple algorithm that basically says, if you could take a step in all directions, if one of them is going upwards, take it. So this will bring you to the top of the hill. The problem is that the world is much more complex than this. Our reality is not just one hill, there's multiple hills to choose from, and all of them except one is a local hill. There's only one highest point in all of these terrain. So imagine yourself being dropped in this complex terrain that has many local hilltops, but only one global top. And it's foggy everywhere, so you can't see anything. Clearly, if you follow the algorithm, if you can take a step upwards, take it. This is very unlikely to bring you to the highest point in the map. It's much more likely to bring you to a local top. And so if you follow this algorithm, you would be climbing the wrong hill. And I find it interesting to use this analogy because as animal advocates, both as individuals and as organizations and as a movement, we are, in fact, in a fog when we're trying to figure out what is the most effective we can do with our time to help animals, or how can we reach our goals of animal liberation as fast as possible. We are in a fog. So in this talk, I'll be borrowing this analogy, and as I said, looking at it from these three perspectives. And you shouldn't think of this talk or this presentation as a comprehensive research piece or deep analytical work exploring everything. This is more me giving access to raw ideas and experiences and observations, and a lot of this also reflects some discussions and issues we are spending a lot of time discussing in the managing board in Anima International. So this is more like access to some raw, unprocessed information or ideas that I'm trying to structure in a way that I think could be interesting or useful for people here. So are you climbing the right hill? I've been climbing many wrong hills in my life. This is a photo from my first liberation back in '97. And this night I was out with the hardcore crew from the Garden Gnome Liberation Front. And if you don't know the Garden Gnome Liberation Front, it's the liberation front that seeks to set garden gnomes free from ugly gardens all over the world. So this is how I was spending my time in '97. And of course, it's just a funny anecdote to get this talk started, but it probably says a lot about why, when I did discover animal rights, why I was so attracted to direct action in the first place. I guess I was kind of risk-willing, you could say. And I think when people from today look back at the direct action movement back in the days, people don't really associate this with people who are concerned about effectiveness or thinking about how can we be effective. But that's actually not true. People were obsessed about how can we be more effective with direct action, but they were just thinking within one simple framework. So they saw one hill and they were trying to think, how can we climb as far and up on this as possible? And of course, not only did it turn out to be a wrong hill, it turned out to be more like the analogy of digging yourself further and further into a hole. And I think for me, it wasn't because there weren't lots of people challenging me on my ideas and defending direct action, and lots of people tried to argue against me, but they never started from the same premises as me. They didn't accept what my goal was, so the arguments they constructed weren't very convincing to me because we started from very different premises. And this is a good example of meeting the right person and the effect of this person asking you hard questions can have on your thinking. So this is a photo of me and Jo Winding, who I went on to build Anima in Denmark with back in the days. And I think Jo was kind of like the first person I really met who wanted the same thing as me, but like heavily disagreed with how I thought I would get there. And he started asking me a line of very difficult and hard questions, and I basically realized that, okay, I can't defend this position, and over a quite short time, I changed my mind completely about direct action. And so Jo and I went on together to start building this organization we called Anima, and we were kind of like building with this idea that we don't want to be dependent, we don't want to rely on too many other people, so we want to know how to do everything ourselves, basically. And it was also like a way of thinking that, okay, but if we know how to do work, it's going to be easier to find somebody else to delegate it to take over, so it's an easy way, so it's a better way to onboard people into the organization. And I think I forgot kind of like along the way, like I forgot many times this idea about only exploring and not continue to climb, and I fell in love with the different types of these jobs. But I think the best example is when my work shifted to investigative work, and I started doing investigations. Because I was looking at like my photos and the video from this work, and I was like, why is it's so shit? Like, why is my work so bad compared to other people from other organizations? And I realized, okay, I don't know anything about photography. I don't know anything about making videos. It's like, okay, I guess I have to become a photographer and a video maker in order to do this work better, which seems smart when you're like running risks. It seems to be a good idea to try to get as high quality footage out as possible. And so I started obsessing more about photography, and I started studying other photographers, and I was really fascinated with the Magnum photographers. So when I was at a photojournalist festival in Perpignan, and Eli Reed had an exhibition there, I was super excited about it because he's one of the photographers that I really admired from Magnum. So I went to the exhibition, and he was there, and he was doing like a tour, and afterwards we were a small group of people standing by him, still talking with him, asking him questions. And then he asked a really good or really hard question back to us. He said, what's the most important thing for taking a great photograph? And people were like, shifting the weight a bit from foot to foot, like a little, shy, like here, Eli Reed. People started going like, oh, it's like the interaction with the subject in the photo. No, it's like a lighting condition. And I was like, composition. I was really into a composition. And he laughed and said, like, yeah, these are all like really important things, but they don't really matter if you don't focus on the most important thing, being there. If you don't put yourself where great photography happens, all the things you mentioned won't matter. And this was like as simple as it was. It was a big realization for me, and it really started me thinking about like how can I take as relevant photos as possible in this investigative work. And so I started asking myself, like, where do I need to be? Like, how can I get as close as possible to this subject that I'm trying to tell stories about? And so that brought me, like very, very close to factory farms, but also, following the animals that were rescued from there, seeing them get a new chance at sanctuaries. It brought me around the world working with great people, like here in the early days of Udvarteklatki, where we are out confiscating damaged or like injured fox pups from fox farms in Poland, and getting a chance to document the work of Udvarteklatki, confiscating and giving these animals a new chance. And this is prior to Anima International, so this is actually where I spent like hours and hours with Pavel in a car, and this is what was like one of maybe like the early reasons of why we started to understanding that maybe we think alike and maybe we can do something interesting together. But of course, you can't have fun things, right? So when we were starting to build Anima International, people were starting to challenge me, like, should you really like become, like, is that like what you should be focusing on? Should you be a photojournalist? Is that like where you should be spending your time? And for me, that was really annoying because I really liked this, and I was really in love with this work. And I mean, like lying on your stomach in the mud, taking photos of pigs, like how can that not be anybody's fantasy? So it was very annoying for me being challenged about this, if I should really be spending my time doing this. But I had to take it serious, and I had to ask myself like these some of these like serious questions as you see here. And I think like in the end, like when I ask myself, do I really start from the animals? Like, am I really starting from how can I be as effective for animals as possible? And like then this question, like, is this about me or the animals? That really hit home for me. And I think for me it was clear like this had become too much about me and like what I like to do, and not based on an analysis of like how can I have the greatest impact for animals. So maybe these are some of the indications of an individual climbing the right hill. You understand that you need to be able to look with radical honesty at yourself. And you need to understand that your journey started some random place. I think all of you have kind of like random starting points, and randomness have played a huge role in where you are today. And you shouldn't be very certain that all this randomness have brought you to the right hill that you are climbing right now. So it's good to stop and consider like how much randomness played a role in your journey. You're asking yourself hard questions. You're not afraid to identify the hardest question, and you take them really serious. You really try to answer them as truthfully as possible. And you practice active open-mindedness. You want to be a person who's like looking to update your thinking. That's like a goal for you, like always be looking to update your thinking. Is your organization climbing the right hill? I think there's these tremendous benefits of you as an organization when you have like one goal that you're laser focused on, because it allows you to really focus and climb this hill very fast. So if you're an organization, or if like you have a major program that's very focused on optimizing for one thing, like media attentions or hand out as many booklets as possible, or get as many commitments as possible, you can really you can be excellent in this if you're really focused on this, because you can put all your energy into this one thing. The problem is that the more isolated you become in your thinking about doing one thing, the more you are ignoring that there could be counterfactual things that you could be spending your time on instead. And I think this quote from Chris Dixon is kind of strong. Like, there's a natural human tendency to make the next step an upward one. And the effect seems to be even stronger in more ambitious people. Their ambition seems to make it hard for them to forego the nearby upward step. So I think like we're all like very focused on making progress, and this can be a trap, like because making a lot of progress, it's not in itself evidence that you are actually focusing the right place. You're just making progress. And when you are like focusing on climbing a single hill, we have amazing tools that can be useful for us to climb even faster. So something like Ray Dalio's 5-step process, where you have a goal and you encounter a problem and you stop up and you diagnose and you redesign and then you execute and move on. I think like many groups are doing this very successfully, so we become better and better at the thing that we are doing. But it doesn't itself answer if you are in fact climbing the right hill, right? It just makes you better at climbing the hill you're currently climbing. So I think we should all be very humble about thinking that we have found like the right strategy or the right intervention or the right campaign, because it's incredibly tricky. And it's incredibly tricky because not only can't you adapt directly from other groups or international, like you need to understand if this actually, like in the first place, is the right theory of change that they have identified, and if this campaign is actually working towards it. But you also need to understand, will this work in my context? Because your context can be vastly different from where this campaign was developed in the first place. So did you identify the root problems in your context in the first place? And I think like groups also realize that maybe some of the most promising or best campaigns, like they seem incredibly difficult or maybe even counterintuitive. So can you even morph your organization into becoming what it would need to be in order to execute these strategies or these campaigns successfully? And do you know, like, how do you know if it's actually going to work in long term? And as you start doing it, if it's not working, is the problem the campaign, the context, or your execution of it? These are all like very, very difficult questions to answer, I feel. And so if we go back to our friends in computer science, they, for like these more complex terrains where there's multiple hills and most of them are local tops and only one of them is a global, They give us another algorithm to try to operate in this environment, and that's using randomness. So instead of committing to one spot in the map and starting to explore from there, you take a step back and you invest like in various places in this map. So like you can consider the stars, like random places where you're dropping down. And for a short time, you are exploring this part of the terrain to pull back and say like, okay, now I have information from all these different places, and you start to put it together. And this will not give you like a perfect answer about the highest point, but it could illustrate like where there are some hills that for sure are not the highest point in this terrain. And so it can qualify you in the right direction, or it can point you in the right direction. So this is an alternative to the simple algorithm. And I think this analogy makes sense for us as well, like thinking about randomness, optimizing for randomness. Maybe like another metaphor to explain it also in a simple way is like battleship, like you're shooting kind of like randomly to identify the opponent's fleet. But I think this is an argument for optimizing for networking and curiosity in your organization. So I think like, straight away, congratulations to everybody who's here at the conference. Like you're optimizing for randomness, and by attending my talk, you can be sure to optimize for randomness. But I think like conferences, like speed meetings, like after this presentation, like I'm sure you'll have like a thought that's like a thought or two that's new, and you couldn't plan for this. Like you couldn't plan to like, okay, I'm gonna, like do something to have this thought or that thought or like this perspective on my idea. Like that happens randomly, but you can optimize for randomness by exposing yourself to other people, for instance, through conferences. You can also use this, like the relationship you build here with people will allow you to get closer to them and study like what they have been successful with. And if you get to know them quite well, they'll probably also tell you where they're failing. And these can be extremely valuable informations for you, or like extremely valuable like data points for you to kind of like start to map your own context, or like identify what campaigns you should be focusing on. And I think people are getting much better at learning from each other, because people are stopping to ask, what did you do? And are starting to ask, like, why did you do what you did? And this is a much better question. And I think you can kind of see it, for instance, in the Vegetarian Society in Denmark. They were successful with lobbying for huge government funding for alternative development of alternative protein. And I think they're one of like the first movers here. So of course, like they want to make this information, they want other organizations to be able to learn from them. But instead of just like having a presentation, here's what we did, like they have made like an overview, say like crucial premises that were needed for this campaign to be successful. And this is a much more interesting way of trying to teach other people how this worked. So now you can, as another group, you can kind of like study these premises, and you can see like, okay, well I have 5 out of these premises present in my country. That's probably a good indication that this campaign might work in my country. And if you only have 2, okay, you're probably updating your thinking in a negative direction. And at the same time, it can also be helpful for you for identifying sub-goals. So if you have 4 out of 8 of the premises, and you can identify 2 premises that you could actually achieve by a campaign in itself, those would be very interesting sub-goals for you to work on maybe. And as we do all of this random stumbling around, we'll also sometimes run into some very inconvenient questions. And I think this is a very inconvenient question for many people, like thinking, like, do we really need to take wild animal suffering into consideration, or like insect sentience? Is that something that I need to take serious? And I'm borrowing this image from Magnus Winding, so this is not like me calling you all speciesists. But I think like the worst thing you can do in this situation is to be like, like it's inconvenient and it's uncomfortable. But I think like the worst thing you can do is to just ignore it. Like you have to think about it, and you have to kind of like take it serious. And of course, we could be spending all of time just exploring, and it's hard to get this balance right. Like it's a balance, because what we have identified that works, we need to exploit it, like because we want to make results now for animals, but at the same time we want to explore. So what is this balance? Like how do you need to balance your time and energy here? this is the question that each organization needs to figure out for themselves. I think another wrong hill that Anima International has been climbing is thinking that more campaigns or bigger campaigns will make you more effective by definition. And it can, but there are some problems standing in the way of it. So if you think of a campaign like from this perspective of this definition and focus on a series of operations, you can look at it as coordination between individuals to execute a plan. And I'm borrowing these slides from Alex Komorowski. I didn't ask him, I hope he doesn't mind. He made an amazing presentation on coordination problems in organizations, or like how organizations are like slime mold. I'm linking it in the end. It's amazing, you need to check it out. He built the entire presentation just using emojis. And many of you who have been building organizations or who are in small organizations can, you can connect to this situation. So it's like two people have a goal that they're trying to work on. It's quite simple. Okay, you both need to invest energy and time at the right place. If one person doesn't, okay, so it's different. Some person needs to invest this, the other person needs to invest that. You have different type of energy for each project that you need to invest. And if one of you don't do it, the project is likely to fail, right? And if you both invest the right time and energy at the right time, it's likely to succeed. And as organizations and the movement is growing, we're not really in the basement anymore, just two people, I miss those days, just working across a table. Now it's more like this, or even more people. So now it's a bunch of people working together to try to achieve a goal. But notice now that there's 10 people involved instead of 2 people, it's much more likely that some of the people will not be able to invest or won't invest the right energy at the right time. And this is not because people are evil or want things to fail. Because everybody has a variety of priorities and have different types of work, there can be situations now where for some people there is something else that is actually a higher priority than this specific project that you're working together on. And as this happens, as people start to withdraw the energy and time into this project, this is picked up on from other people in the team. They can see people are investing now less in this project than they thought they would or that was agreed. This is very negative. It brings you into a downhill spiral. And now more people start to prioritize other work as well because this project is now less likely to succeed. So why should I invest my time and energy in this if this is now less likely to succeed? And this then leads to failure in some situations. So again, maybe some indications of an organization climbing the right hill. It understands that campaign progress can happen on a wrong hill. And it's not afraid to kill programs or campaigns if it realizes that this is a wrong hill and it's able to do it. It understands the value of its activist networking. And it learns not by asking what did they do, but why did they do what they did. And it has a do your own research approach. So it's using critical thinking to understand how international strategies and tactics sometimes needs to be adapted to national context, and it has this focus when it's assessing what is the right work for my organization to do. And it balances exploitation with exploration and encourages its activists to explore and understands the challenges of campaign coordination. Is a movement climbing the right hill? And as I said, as this talk progresses, so will my uncertainty. So, if you want to challenge me afterwards on any of this, please do it. And I wouldn't be surprised if I end up changing or updating my thinking after this. So I don't know much about game theory, but I do know that it is becoming more and more important to understand as we become more and more organization and as the movement is growing as a whole. And I think it's kind of like the mathematical models definition in game theory that made it daunting to me and probably other people. This equation doesn't seem attractive to me for some reason, but think of it as strategic interactions among rational agents. And if we can look at kind of what are some examples of these strategic interactions amongst rational agents. Maybe this picture is not the best example of rational agents. It can be discussed. But think of, maybe one of the best examples of game theory is zero-sum games. So zero-sum games is when a group of people trying to compete for what they consider like a finite amount of resources. So here, the dog has discovered that cuddles are like a finite resource, and it needs to compete straight away with the cat for it, right? So you and your friends fighting over sharing a pizza. And I think these zero-sum games, you can observe, or at least you have been, I think it's changing now, but I think you have been able to observe this in Europe between groups. As groups started getting contacts in the US with major donors, and as groups started getting serious about being evaluated by ACE and building an image, I think you could kind of observe some of these zero-sum dynamics happening in between the groups in Europe. Because the point is, it can be very rational for you from your local perspective. If you have established contact to a major donor in the US and you are now getting funding for your organization, even if you see that another organization is doing great work, sharing that donor with this organization, it could be considered a threat to you. Because what if this is a finite amount of resources? Will that mean less funding for you? Will that mean changes in your organization? What if this donor all of a sudden likes the work of the other group better? That can be a threat to you. So from your local perspective, this can be a fully rational decision that you don't want to share this information. And in the same way, as groups started competing more for the top charity of the animal charity evaluators, there was a point where there could only be 3. Now there can be more. I think it's good. But you also saw a dynamic where groups who in the early grassroots movement were extremely honest with each other about all the problems they had in their organizations, and sharing ideas for campaigns, and oh, you could do this, we're thinking about this, but we don't have time to do it, maybe you could do it. You really saw that this became much more private in organizations, because why should you tell another organization about something that could make them successful if that makes them a competitor for you for a top charity position? And why should you talk about your problems or your failures if you believe that somebody's gonna if more people know about this, and if this can be a problem for you when you will be evaluated. So I think you could really see this this mentality spread at some point in the European movement. And of course, there's nothing novel about this, and institutions like animal charity evaluators and open philanthropy, they knew it, and I think they have constructed incentive structures against these kind of zero-sum games. So for instance, both ACE and Open Phil will give movement building grants. So they're trying to optimize for groups helping others, trying to build this mentality. You can also see that with ACE, I don't know how many are familiar with, but they will give plus points for groups that are collaborative, and they will give minus points if you're uncollaborative. And the same way when you interact with open philanthropy, you can see that they really value good faith approach, and adversarial behavior is something that they will be really against. There are some of these dynamics between groups, strategic interactions between rational agents are quite simple, in zero-sum games, but there are some very complex ones that are very, very fascinating. And there's this one system of problems that has been named moloch. I think it was made famous by Scott Alexander, a blogger, in his post Meditations on Moloch. So he's from the rationalist community. And I think the best way to explain this problem is to explain why Moloch was used as a name by explaining this lore of this legendary ancient god. So here's the deal that Moloch will give you. Sacrifice what you hold dearest to me, sacrifice some of your children to me, and I will give you good fortune in war. So now, this is the deal that Moloch gives to you. So now imagine a region with many different city-states, and all of them have the opportunity to practice Moloch. Are you gonna do it? I mean, even knowing that other agents or other city-states have the option of practicing Moloch, and this will give them advantage in war, and you're in this region and you're in conflict with each other, are you gonna take that advantage? And if you look at it from just from like a local rational perspective, it's like, if you don't do it and somebody else do it, you will get wiped out. So like even though you have to sacrifice children, like you're gonna get wiped out anyway. So you're gonna end up sacrificing children because you need this advantage in war. Now the problem is that sooner or later, everybody will start doing this or they will be at disadvantage. Now everybody is sacrificing children to Moloch, but nobody has an advantage. Also notice how difficult it is to stop this mechanism. If one group wants to stop sacrificing children to Moloch, it will get wiped out. So no single group can rationally make a decision to stop practicing Moloch. So you're caught in this trap. And this is why it's referred to as the rational guard of coordination failure. So the only way to escape this is if everybody can get together and agree, we're gonna stop practicing Moloch. But then should you practice Moloch in secret? Probably you should. I think, okay, so you can be like, okay, that's all interesting. Jan, thank you for this lore story, but what does it have to do with us? I think Moloch is everywhere in society, and it's also in our movement. And in this example, I think, let's see if the Humane League will disagree with me, but I think the Humane League spotted Moloch in the early US cage-free movement or cage-free campaign. So at this point, this is before people had gotten together and united on a single ask. And it's also before people had success getting full cage-free commitments. So groups were more like, oh, can we get a 20% commitment from this company, cage-free commitment? That would be amazing. So now you have more and more groups starting getting into this work. So there's like many groups working on the cage-free issue. So now there starts to be competition between groups who will get the campaign victories, because campaign victories gives prestige and makes you look good in front of donors, it gives you more money, and so you need to get these campaign victories. So now you're optimizing for getting the victories first. So that creates an incentive for accepting weaker commitments than somebody else. If somebody wants 30%, well, you can make a deal that says 25%, and you're probably going to get the deal with the company. So more groups will start lowering the bar in order to be in this competition for the commitments. This will drag the bar lower and lower, and everyone is worse off. Also notice again like how difficult it is to opt out of this Moloch that has now appeared. If one group is starting to set a higher bar for commitments, companies will just make deals with other organizations who's willing to accept a weaker commitment. So that's less result for the group working with the higher bar, less traction, less funding, less capacity. So you're trapped in this. Unless you do what the Humane League and I think other groups in the US as well got to, understood that this Moloch was happening and got together and said okay, we all need to get together in the same room and decide to have the same ask. And nobody goes under this ask. And I think this is also the beginning of the Open Wing Alliance, because what is the Open Wing Alliance? The Open Wing Alliance is a coordination of groups to prioritize the same goal. And you can think of this as creating cooperative games with multiple players. And there's also a very interesting dynamic here. Open Wing Alliance is increasing the pool of funding for coalition partners gradually. So it's a non-zero-sum game, because as the coalition is more successful, the funders see okay, there's more traction here, so we should invest more and more money here. So people working together in a non-zero-sum game is actually increasing the pool of funding for this movement. And of course, Open Wing Alliance coordinates the global grant giving as well. But Moloch is very hard to defeat. It's not a simple problem to solve. So I've tried to analyze an example here, and uncertainty grows and grows and grows. But let's try to look at some of the collaborations in Open Wing Alliance and see if we can spot some Moloch. So groups in the Open Wing Alliance usually have both local, so national, and global priorities. But most groups have much more local priorities, because that's your group, and you have much more opportunities there and problems. And usually in Open Wing Alliance you have one or few targets at a time. And at home you have all this myriad of issues you're trying to solve. And also like with the local priorities, you usually are like often like the single winner or loser. So you have like very strong ownership of the work that happens on local level, whereas on global priorities, you're part of something bigger, and you can easily end up feeling less ownership because you know you're just a part of something bigger. Groups benefit from being in the Open Wing Alliance even if they don't prioritize the work. So if there's a global campaign against a corporation that's also in your country, if there's a strong coalition working on this, and if you're not really that active, if it wins, you will have a cage-free win in your country. So that can create an incentive for prioritizing national work instead of global work, because that means double win for you. You'll solve your local problems, and the alliance solves the global problems that you thereby also benefit from. But over power, or over time, as groups identify this or start consciously or unconsciously playing such a game, that means less power for the coalition. That creates less effective global campaigns. So that leads to fewer or slower or weaker global wins. That means that more groups start to think like, why should I give priority to this work if it now like seems less likely to succeed? And so everyone is worse off from a global perspective. Also notice again like how hard it is to opt out of this. If you are now a group that decides like, okay, I need to give higher priority to Open Wing Alliance and other groups are not doing it, that means you have to do much more work. And I think like I think it can be seen that some groups now have to do a lot more work in the coalition than others. That means that those groups now have lower power to handle national priorities. So that means like less single winner situations for them, less traction, less funding, less capacity. And I think defeating Moloch is a moonshot. And again, I'm borrowing slides from Alex Komorowski here. It's going to be incredibly difficult to defeat Moloch in our movement. But I think instead of thinking of it as like a moonshot, as like one single task that we have to do, it's more beneficial to use this like sighting at the moon. Instead of a moonshot, you're taking sight at the moon. And what makes you able to get closer to the moon is by taking a roof shot instead. So you break this down. You try to make incremental progress in this work. And step by step, you get closer and closer. And I think like I observed this in the Open Wing Alliance as well, that like coordinators are observing some of these problems, are trying to reiterate and create better incentive structures, are trying to improve it, trying to solve it. So I think it is on the path. But I think what is probably missing is giving Moloch a name, like speaking more open and honestly about some of the dynamics, some of the games that can be played consciously or unconsciously between groups, understanding that it's not an evil thing. It can be fully rational from each group's perspective, but really start to understand what are these sort of problems that happens in coalitions and talk about them openly. I think this will bring us closer to the moon. Because if we don't point in the same direction at defeating Moloch, for sure we won't have a chance. So indications maybe of a movement climbing the right hill. We all want to collaborate, but we should understand that it's not enough to have the will to collaborate. We need to understand what the games that are being played amongst people, amongst groups, like why they are there and how they work in order to be able to make progress. We should give things a name. We should create a language around it so we can talk about these things, because we can solve things when we talk it out, because we want the same thing. So when we understand things better, it will make us more likely to solve it. And I think we should recognize that studying these coalition campaigns that are successful and those who fail, like we should understand that we should probably study this much more and understand that this is very different from understanding what's the most effective intervention you can do. This is like an area of research of its own. And so to end off this talk by going back to a point I made the last time I was standing here, stating that like everything that I'm put together in that talk, like there's really nothing creative about it, or like there's nothing new about it. Creativity is just like taking existing ideas and putting them together in a new context and trying to convey it in an effective way. And with that in mind, I have taken all the articles or like documents or resources that inspired me for this talk and put them in a document. So if you want access to it, you can just scan this QR code. And I'm going to leave it here during the question and answers. And you'll find some of the interesting articles that inspired me for this talk. And hopefully I won't get sued for using some of the slides of Alex Komorowski. We'll see. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan. Let's move on to the Q&A session. You can still add questions in inventory, although we don't have much time, so I'll just pick a few. 1 second. Okay. Do you see risks in deciding to do only what is best for animals instead of what is fulfilling for you? Do you think there is some middle ground?
Yeah, so I think you're probably not doing the best thing for animals if it doesn't somehow, if it's not aligned with what is best for you in the end. Like if you're going to burn yourself out in 3 years doing something very effective, but this is not a fit for you personally, like I don't see how that's more effective for animals. That seems like optimizing for being ineffective. But I think people tend to forget that just because you're not good at something right now, it doesn't mean that you can't get very good at it. It's more about understanding, could I prioritize learning new skills, or could I develop myself in that direction? And I think most people find a lot of enjoyment in being good at something. And I think most people here have the potential to become very good at a wide variety of things. So I think it's more about the timeline in people's minds here, like, oh, like, so tomorrow I should be doing this work that I hate. Like, no, you should think about like what is like your potential, and it will change over the years because it's not static. It's a dynamic landscape. You know, like if major things can happen with big campaigns being won, like new research coming out, this can also like what is like the global optimum for you. So like you need to all the time like think about, and like all the time, but like with intervals think about like, am I on the right path, or is it likely that I should be focusing somewhere else, or turning, you know, developing myself in a new direction?
Thank you. From your vast experience of climbing wrong hills, what are you happy to have learned from the time spent climbing them?
I think it is the like valuing people asking really annoying questions, or like really pressing back on you, like really appreciate, understand that people who are challenging you, like they come from like a very good place, and if you have these people in your circle, you should really appreciate them, and you should encourage your surroundings to challenge you.
Okay. Okay. 1 second. Okay. You drew a connection between direct action and digging yourself into a hole. Do you genuinely believe that direct action is counterproductive, or do you just think it is less effective?
I think it's like everything is context. I think everything must be seen in the context. Here I was speaking about the context of you know, early or late 90s. For sure, back then it was digging yourself into a hole. Will there be a time in the future where it's not digging yourself into a hole? It's like it's fully possible.
If new activists should ask themselves one question, what question should it be? One serious and meaningful question.
I think if you especially if you feel like you want to become a leader of something, you want to start something, like I think you should challenge yourself and ask, like, why do I want to be a leader? I think this is like a maybe a sub answer to the question, but I think this is very important, and you should really dig into this and understand like why you want to lead something. But I would start from thinking about like understanding how, like, ask the question, in the next like 30 years, how can I like be most effective for animals in a way that's sustainable for me, and then try to make a map, start making a plan for like how to get there. It could mean that you need to be somewhere completely different than where you are now, but we have time. So like, you can develop yourself in this direction.
How can we further leverage the positive sum nature of the animal movement?
Sorry?
How can we further leverage the positive sum nature of the animal movement?
I'm not sure I understand the question. The positive sum of the animal movement. Okay, so how we can I think one thing that's very interesting is I think like this dynamic that happened in the Open Wing Alliance, where you realized as the coalition is successful, everybody benefits. Like understanding where there are these non-zero sum or like positive sum games, like try to understand under which circumstances they appear. I don't know. I don't feel like I have a good question to that right now. Maybe ask me later. I'll have a better one.
Okay, so maybe this one. Do you think that coordination problems, of this nature could be solved by more leaders and global coordinates in animal welfare?
Yeah, so in theory, right? Because I mean, like that's why there's not city-states anymore. That's why there are countries, or like monarchs or dictatorships or like democracies. Like you're trying to install some governance body to take care of these coordination problems because they are everywhere. But I mean, in theory, yes, a global coordination unit could do it. But like, should you trust it, or like, why wouldn't like games start to appear there as well? Like, I'm very skeptical about the execution of it. But in theory, yes, like one ruler or like one coordinator, like it seems to be one way to solve these coordination problems. But I'm very skeptical about the ability to execute it in practice. I think the most promising thing, like where there's most to benefit from now, is to discuss it more in the movement. And I mean, as I had the slide, I don't know much about game theory. So.
What if we are all climbing the wrong hill, but by being complacent with an economic system that is built on exploitation by design?
Yeah, let's explore it. Yeah, but I mean, it's like, what if long-termism is right? I mean, like there's many difficult questions to look at, and we shouldn't reject any questions. Like we should investigate them and understand if it's true. And I don't have like high confidence about like being on the right hill, but I think like asking these questions and understanding that this is a topic that you can investigate, that's probably very promising for reducing the risk that you're going to be continuing on it.
Okay, I think we can do one more. Do you think that the increasing funding in the movement is helping us deal with Moloch-like situation, or exacerbating red ocean competitiveness? The increased funding, is it helping us deal with Moloch, or is it making it worse?
I think it was making it worse at some time, but I feel like the movement is returning to a place of honesty. I think as people form better connections and like as leaders trust each other more, the better I get to know leaders from other organizations, the more I understand that everybody is dealing with the same problems. But if you just look at it from the outside, like it might, look as everything is shiny and perfect. So I think we are improving here. So I'm less worried about it, but it is an issue we should be concerned about. But at the same time, I think institutions like ACE and OpenPhil are good at creating incentive structures for cooperative games. And I think Open Wing Alliance is leading the way here, creating cooperative multiplayer games. So I think this is the direction we should be thinking and learn and study the success of this more.
Okay, I have permission to ask one more question. How do you build a culture of radical honesty in a team?
I guess that's a very large question. Take the first step, or be the example. I think is an important place to start. Like if you're not gonna walk the talk yourself, like why should anybody else do it? So I think this is challenging because it can be very uncomfortable, and you need to understand like how to develop it gradually. Like radical honesty can be very provocative, and like you need to understand like how to roll this out. And probably many people would be not very happy about it as well. So I think you need to understand like the context of the team and your organization. Like if this is the direction you want to go, then start studying like the reasons behind like why radical honesty can be so important for building organizational culture. Right? You'll learn a lot from Kirsty's talk tomorrow about culture as well. I think like you have to start with yourself. Like this is why like it puts so much responsibility on leaders to really walk the talk.
Thank you very much, Jan, for the talk. Thank you very much for attending. Give it up for Jan.